times the subordinate skill of 3 for a total of 48. So why have I concentrated so much? Why have I been talking so much about the skill levels of the managers and the workers? Because it turns out that how workers are matched together, how managers are paired with subordinates, makes a lot of difference to output. To illustrate that, let's suppose that we had a labor force consisting of 2 3 workers, that is 2 workers of skill level 3, and 2 4 workers, 2 workers of skill level 4. Well, there are 2 ways of doing the matching in that case. We could match one of the 3 workers with one of the 4 workers, and the other 3 worker with the other 4 worker. If we did it that way, we would get a total output of 96. But alternatively, we could match one of the 3 workers with the other 3 worker, and one of the 4 workers with the other 4 worker, and get a total output of 91. Now, 96 is bigger than 91. I probably don't have to tell you that. So we would expect that for this particular labor force, we would get the 3 worker matched with the 4 worker. In other words, we would get what I call cross-matching, rather than 3 worker being matched with another 3 worker, 4 worker being matched with another 4 worker, which is homogeneous matching. So for this labor force, we get cross-matching. But that's just this labor force. Suppose we changed the labor force a little bit so that now instead of 2 4 workers and 2 3 workers, we have 2 4 workers and 2 2 workers. Then, once again, we can compare cross-matching with homogeneous matching, but now we get more output with homogeneous matching, 72 versus 64. What is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is the kind of pattern we will see in matching will depend on what workers, what skill levels are available. And now I invite those of you who are not interested in these mathematical details to come back in again. I hope you've answered your messages. And I want to apply these ideas to our 2 countries, the rich country and the poor country. Remember, the rich country has A workers and B workers. The poor country has C workers and D workers. And I want to do the same kind of thought experiment that I did when I talked about the theory of comparative advantage. That is, I want to compare the production patterns before and after globalization. But remember, globalization now means something different. Globalization now means the ability to match workers across international lines. Before globalization, that's not possible. All of the matching has to be done within a country. Globalization means that if you're a company based in the Philippines, you can hire workers from Thailand if you want. So what happens before globalization? Before international production is possible? Well, in the rich country, we will have A workers matched with B workers. In the poor country, we will have C workers matched with D workers. Notice that there's no matching across international boundaries. And what I want to do is to see how that pattern changes once we allow for international production. Well, as you can see on the screen, it changes quite dramatically. Now, we have matching between the B workers in the rich country and the C workers from the poor country. But because there's matching between the B and C workers, the D workers have to homogeneously match, that is, match with other D workers, and the A workers have to work with other A workers. Now, I don't care about the A workers. They're in fine shape because they're the most highly skilled, but I do care about the D workers, and I want to examine what effects globalization has on D worker wages. Well, before globalization, the D workers were working with the C workers. You probably know from experience that if you are working with someone who is more highly skilled than you, that's good for you. That makes you more effective, more productive. Everybody wants to work with someone of high skill. And the same is true for the D workers in this setting. They benefit from having worked with the C workers. That was good for their wages. But after globalization, the D workers are left to their own devices because the C workers have left to be matched with the B workers from the rich country. So we see that the D workers' wages will actually fall as a result of globalization, where at best they will remain the same. What about the C workers' wages? Well, they're getting this new great opportunity. They get to work with the B workers in the rich country, so their wages will certainly rise as a result of globalization. And so what will happen to inequality in the poor country? Well, if the C workers' wages are rising, the D worker wages are falling, we'll have more inequality than before. And this is exactly what has been going on in emerging country after emerging country. This is what has happened in China, for example. The C workers of China got these wonderful new manufacturing opportunities in the city and saw their wages rise. Hundreds of millions of workers saw their wages rise, but hundreds of millions of other workers were left out in the country and had essentially zero change, or sometimes a negative change, to their wages. Those are the D workers, and we've seen a rise in inequality in China. Well, that's the story. That's the theory that Michael Kremer and I are proposing. And the big question, of course, is what are the implications of this theory for policy? What should we be doing about it if we care about inequality? Well, I think there's a very strong policy implication, which is to counteract inequality, we have to somehow raise the skill levels of these D workers so that they have the same opportunities that the C workers have, so that they can be matched internationally too. At the moment, they don't have any skills to offer, and so they're essentially ignored by the international labor market. So the key is to provide them with some skills through job training, through education. The complication, of course, is that training and education are expensive, and someone has to pay for it. Who is going to pay? Well, the workers themselves can't pay for it because we're talking about some of the poorest people in the world. These are the D workers. They can't afford to pay to upgrade their skills. Now, you might say employers should do it, the people who are hiring them, the companies that are hiring them. But the problem with that is that employers typically don't have sufficient incentive to hire and train D workers. Why not? Because if you hire me, if I'm a D worker and you hire me, some of your investment is going to be lost if you train me, since you're now going to have to pay me more. And even worse, once you've trained me, I can go to work for your competitor next door, and your investment in me is lost altogether. So producers typically do not have sufficient incentive to train all the D workers who should be trained. And that means that someone else is going to have to get into the act. And that someone else could be domestic governments, international agencies, foreign aid, private foundations, any of a number of different possible third parties. But the point is that somebody is going to have to do it. It's not, inequality is not going to solve itself. You cannot just leave it to the markets to solve the problem, because the market is going to tend to increase inequality, not decrease it. So what is the moral of the story? What is the grand conclusion I want to draw? Contrary to recent political events, I am not calling for an end to globalization. I think it would be a big mistake to try to stop globalization, even if you could stop it, because, as I said at the outset, globalization has brought enormous prosperity to the world. The problem is that the fruits of that prosperity have not been equally divided. They have gone disproportionately to skilled labor, leaving unskilled labor behind. And so the bottom line, if you like, of this story is not to stop globalization, but to allow low-skilled workers, the D workers of the world, to benefit from globalization too. And with that bottom line, let me stop and thank you warmly for your attention this afternoon. Thank you.
Sorry, okay. Thank you very much, Professor Maskin. That was a very insightful lecture, not only covering globalization, but in fact about public finance, how to finance education. And at this point in time, we will open the floor for questions in the spirit of dialogue. There are microphones, a microphone at each major aisle. So may I request anyone who would like to ask Professor Maskin to identify yourself, your school, or organization before you ask the question. Since there's still...
Good. Hello.
My question, is there a question?
I am here upstairs.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Should you go first, or do you want me to ask now?
Sure.
I'll go first?
Sure.
Okay, good afternoon, Professor Maskin over here. On your right. Good afternoon, Professor Maskin. That was a wonderful talk. I'm Albert from Salle University. So my question is, do you think universal basic income can reduce inequality, given that automation and artificial intelligence will likely displace a lot of low-skilled workers? Thank you.
That's a terrific question, because indeed one of the big political discussions that we're already having and probably will have even more in the future is, what do we do about people who lose their jobs because of mechanization? The short answer to your question is, I think a universal basic income is a terrific idea to ensure a safety net for everybody, and it's one of the tools that can be used to fight inequality. But I don't think it's the only one, and in fact, there's a sense in which universal basic income is only a short-run solution, because if you take that basic income away for some reason, and there's always a political danger that politicians will be tempted to get rid of a basic income, then the people who have been relying on it are stuck. And so a longer-term solution is to make sure that they have some way of generating a good income for themselves. And that means training in new skills. If their old skills have been made obsolescent, what you want to do is to give them new skills, which will be demanded even after the new technology. I like to use a historical example when talking about this point, which is the original industrial revolution. We're certainly going through an industrial revolution at the moment, a revolution of robots, if you like, but there was a great industrial revolution in the late 18th, early 19th century, in which machines replaced humans in many tasks. And the same worry was expressed for that first revolution that is being expressed now, namely that it would make human beings obsolescent, that we wouldn't need them anymore. Well, that didn't happen, because after these new technologies were introduced, entrepreneurs found ways of creating new jobs for human workers that still made them productive, and in fact made them even more productive than they were before. And so during the 19th century, we saw a dramatic increase in wage and a dramatic increase in employment, in demand for employment, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in the current Industrial Revolution, but if history repeats itself, and it often does, we can expect that there will be plenty of new jobs made possible by the new technology, in which case, in addition to the universal basic income that you're suggesting, I suggest that we concentrate on preparing people for those new jobs.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so
Brother, yes?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Maskin. Brother Joe Scheider from the physics department here. I'm familiar with the books by Paul Krugman about the conscience of a liberal, and Noam Chomsky's Who Rules the World. It seems to me that many of your ideas might fit in with what they're talking about, and also what Pope Francis and other popes have been talking about. Would you want to comment on relationships between your ideas and ideas of those people?
Yes, I think you're right that there's a connection. Paul Krugman, who, by the way, was a long-time colleague of mine when I was at Princeton, and a friend of mine, has written very eloquently about the possible dangers of globalization, which was a theme this afternoon. He, like me, is not opposed to globalization. In fact, would argue that it should be encouraged. But he, like me, understands that globalization is not a process that benefits all people automatically, and so that we have an obligation as a society to try to take care of the people who are ignored, left out of the globalization process. And that brings me to the connection with Pope Francis. Pope Francis has been, I think, a blessing not only for Catholics, but a blessing for the world because of his emphasis on our responsibility to those who are left out, our responsibility to the poor, to the people who are unable to fend for themselves. So, you know, it may be presumptuous of me to connect myself with the Pope, but at least in this regard, I would like to claim him as a fellow fighter for the D workers of the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Joseph. Just to have an argumentation, I'm quite intrigued by the title of your talk, but it looks like from your conclusion and your policy recommendation, it is not globalization that is the cause, but rather the lack or the limited investment in human capital.
Yes, I think that's right. In fact, the most important investment any society can make is in human capital, in an investment in its people, because ultimately, as even the theory of comparative advantage says, the wealth and well-being of a nation is the people that that nation can call on to do the nation's work. So human capital is just a way of enhancing the productivity of a nation's citizens.
Well, globalization is not only enhanced trade, but it's also enhanced flow of people, including human capital. And so through educational services, trade in educational services, the level of education and the level of human capital of other emerging economies are enhanced through globalization.
They are indeed. When I think of the reach that I, as a teacher, have through globalization, I'm now able to speak directly to students all over the world. Harvard's courses are being put online. We have the so-called massive MOOCs, massive online courses, which anybody in the world can enroll in, and that increases productivity and increases the effect that a teacher like me can have.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Maskin. Are there other questions from the audience? Oh, yes. Blood, is that Blood?
Yeah. Hi. Hi, sir. My name is Vladimir Santos. I'm from SOE. Oh my gosh. I'm a fifth-year student of economics. My question is, wait lang, just to sir, if I'm right, you mentioned that educating workers would help increase their wages and thus reduce inequality in wage. Is that right? Yes. Well, however, Thomas Piketty, in his world-renowned book, Capital in the 21st Century, a book that explains inequality, said that improving the education of workers as a way to increase their wages and thus reduce the gap between equality is a myth because, as his data shows, in the olden times, to receive a wage of, say, arbitrarily 20,000 pesos, you needed just a high school degree, a diploma. Several years later, you need a college degree to attain the same wage. Later on, you now need a master's degree to attain that kind of wage, hence the curse of millennials. So therefore, he concluded that this race between education and wage is a myth. What can you comment on that?
Well, I'm an admirer of Piketty's work from an empirical point of view. The great accomplishment of his book was to document through laborious evidence gathering the extent to which inequality patterns have been changing since the 19th century. Where I am not such a great admirer is in his explanations for why we have seen the recent increase in inequality that's been taking place. And again, to show you, to illustrate where I think he goes wrong, let me just go back to the original Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Revolution of 200 years ago, where not so much education, but job training made an enormous difference to inequality and to wages. We saw the greatest increase in standard of living in the 19th century that the world had ever seen before. And that was due to new technology combined with skills in being able to operate that new technology. Piketty ignores the original Industrial Revolution, and that's one of the places where I think he goes wrong.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir?
Hi, Professor Maskin. I'm Lorenzo Ampil from DLSU as well. You said that the solution to inequality is the provision of training to relatively low-skilled workers, and that we should still let globalization take its toll. I'm just wondering, does this mean that you are against the imposition of trade barriers in order to protect the industries of low-skilled workers, such as in the Philippines we have the sugar and the rice industries that are still being slightly protected?
Right. I think that trade barriers can sometimes be used temporarily for good purposes. If you are trying to develop a new industry, for example, it's going to take some time for that industry to become internationally competitive. And you might want to give the industry some time under protection before subjecting it to the full competition of global markets. But to keep trade barriers in place permanently, I think is a mistake, because it encourages a misallocation of resources. If you're protecting sugar, you will tend to have an overproduction of sugar. And what is better, I feel, is to at least eventually remove trade barriers, have a proper allocation of resources, but then to correct, if you don't like the allocation of income that's being produced, to correct the allocation of income through taxes, through minimum guaranteed income, and through education. So the short answer to your question is yes, I am generally highly skeptical of trade barriers.
Just a short note, a short question, Professor Maskin. You are known internationally for mechanism design, implementation theory, and masking going to international trade. Is this new theory your contribution to international trade, or is this an extension of mechanism design?
I would say that the policy implications that I was trying to draw from this theory, namely developing skills for D workers, is an example of mechanism design. So one thing I didn't go into during the talk is, well, how do you train D workers or educate D workers? That's really more a goal than a policy. So mechanism design can be used as a tool for designing effective ways of getting these D workers trained. Let me mention one example of mechanism design in action for training D workers. And that's a policy called conditional cash transfers. Brazil, among other countries, has used conditional cash transfers very effectively. The idea is you give a transfer to a poor family, which they use to supplement their income, but you make the transfer conditional on sending their children to school. So this accomplishes two things. You make the family temporarily better off by giving them some money, but more importantly, you make an investment in the future because you free up this family who perhaps needed their children to work on the family farm to go to school to acquire skills which they can then use to support themselves in higher paying jobs. So that's an example of applied mechanism design, using a clever policy tool for accomplishing a policy goal.
Thank you very much for the clarification. We have a question from the student upstairs.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Peaches Bagadion from the Senior High School Department of La Salle University. With respect to the status quo of occurrences between the Philippines and United States, in which there is a rapid growth of overseas workers because the emerging country is conditioned through foreign aid to work for the developed nations, wouldn't the increase of foreign aid eventually result in the downfall of the rich nation in such a way that it eliminates opportunities for the locals of the rich nation, thus resulting to a new level of inequality?
That's heavy. Okay.
That's a big question. That's a big question, but I think it's based on a false premise, which is that there's only a fixed size pie to be divided up. And so if we give some more of this pie to foreign workers, there is not enough pie left for the domestic workers. I see an economy as a variable size pie. That is, if you put more resources into the system, you get a bigger pie. And so if you employ more foreign workers, you get more output. That gives people more income. That in turn induces them to demand more goods, which expands employment opportunities. So I think a lot of the argument against having foreign workers is misconceived because it assumes that if you employ those workers, nothing else will happen. But in fact, if you employ those workers, you're probably going to get a bigger pie.
Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon, Professor Maskin. My name is Robert. By the way, thank you for your sharing and knowledge from PhD student. My question is about what you can suggest about our Philippine economy, because as you mentioned a while ago, the comparative advantage. So we need to more focus to land to produce rice. So what you can suggest, because we are, as we know, our GNP is not focused more on agricultural productivity. In fact, we are emerging, shifting to technological development and industry-based development. Now, if we will going to stop going back to status quo, that we will going to nurture more on agricultural development than technological development, does you suggest to us that we focus going back to agricultural development than technological development, alter stopping producing more skilled worker into college level diploma?
Okay, let me make I'm glad you asked that question. It's a good question. Let me make two comments about it. First, you're right that the theory of comparative advantage suggests that countries should specialize in the goods for which their labor supply is well suited, and in the case of developing countries, that will often be agricultural goods. But, and this is the big but, first, the skills that a country have are not determined once and for all. They can be changed. They can be changed through education. And so just because a country currently has very low-skill workers on average doesn't mean that it will always have low-skill workers. Second, even an industry like agriculture benefits from technology. There's a big difference between subsistence farming, which is producing enough so that your family can survive, and using modern agricultural techniques which allow you to produce a big enough output so that you can sell most of what you're producing on the market. So even if a country decides that it is going to concentrate on agriculture, that doesn't mean that it has to concentrate on agriculture at a very low skill level. It can use modern techniques which require high skills and high technology.
I have an additional question to that, Professor. You know, given the emphasis on education for training, education is also for knowledge capital. Should the country like the Philippines, an emerging country, invest resources in research and development?
Absolutely. In fact, I said before that the most important investment that a country can make is an investment in human capital. Part of such an investment must be in basic knowledge. Historically, all of the great advances in technology, in science, in all of the great advances which have improved our lives have ultimately been traced back to increase in basic knowledge. And so yes, Philippines and every other country should be investing in basic knowledge.
Thank you for that reassurance. For our last question, yes?
My name is Kobe Mendoza. I'm a freshman. And so I'd like to ask, when you said about training the D class workers, do you mean bringing them up to C level skill? And wouldn't doing that push C level skills wages and salaries downward?
No, good question. No, the short answer is having full equality of skills is an unrealistic goal, and expecting that D workers will move all the way up to sea level is not only unrealistic, but counterproductive. What you want is an improvement in D-level skills sufficient so that they're no longer left out of global labor markets. That's what you need to be able to counteract inequality. Of course, it's a lovely dream that everybody is exactly the same and gets exactly the same income, but that's all it is. It's a dream, and it's not a realistic reality.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'd like to thank Professor Maskin. You know, he arrived last night, and he arrived here at De La Salle at 11:30. It's almost 4 o'clock, and he's still very active, willing to answer your questions, but I have a class. So, well, thank you very much, Professor Maskin, and welcome to De La Salle. Thank you. Somebody's escorting. Oh, sorry. May we invite the university fellows to please come up the stage for an photo opportunity with Dr. Maskin. University fellows to be followed by an photo op with the university administrators. to read this, I know the audience is no longer here until the end of the recessional. For an orderly exit, guests from the orchestra section will be the first to leave the auditorium, to be followed by the guests at the balcony areas. Our ushers will assist you on your way out. This is very important for the students. For DLSU students who attended the lecture as an alternative class, please proceed to the ground floor of Yuchenko Hall for attendance. For students who have left items at the depository, please proceed to the 5th floor of the multi-purpose hall of the Henry C. Hall to claim your items and for your attendance. Both areas will have ID scanners. Have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.